All right, the document that we're going to look at today is a General Assembly document with this unique ID number. It was distributed December 7th, 2023. And again, well, we know we're in the 78th session. It relates to agenda item 16F, and that item is macroeconomic policy questions. Promotion of international cooperation to combat illicit financial flows and strengthen good practices on assets return to foster sustainable development. And this document is actually the report of the second committee. What is the second committee? We'll go to our chart, and we know that second committee is part of the main committees. The main committees is a subsidiary organ of the General Assembly. And the second committee here is has the subject matter economic and financial. The main committees, there are six of them: first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. Second committee here, economic and financial. The chairman is His Excellency Carlos Amarin of Uruguay. And what does the second committee deal with? Well, it's called economic and financial. It's pretty broad, but more specifically, issues relating to economic growth and development, such as macroeconomic policy questions, financing for development, sustainable development, globalization and interdependence, eradication of poverty, operational activities for development, agricultural development, food security and nutrition, and information and communications technologies for development. All right, let's go back to our document, take a look here, and it's agenda item 16F. And what I like to do is I just like to check the agenda to make sure it's there and it lines up. So here's our agenda of the 78th session, and let's go to 16F. 16, macroeconomic policy questions. F, promotion of international cooperation to combat illicit financial flows, strengthen good practices on assets return to foster sustainable development. So, yep, there it is. So, actually, this agenda item 16F is part of a larger group in agenda item 16. And the report of the second committee, what they actually did is they broke it into different parts. Like, this is addendum 6 of document 459. So, what they did is they had a lots of resolutions dealing with macroeconomic policy questions, and they split it up. So actually, this is the full report of the second committee, and here you can see the report of the committee on this item is being issued in 9 parts, and our document is this addendum 6, and then here's F, and so they actually were working on all these other items: international financial system development, external debt, sustainability and development, commodities. So a bunch of different other topics. But this art document here is actually just the 16F. And like the other reports that we saw from the other main committees, is they looks like they break it up into 3 different sections. Introduction is the first, and then part 2 is consideration of draft resolutions. And in this case, they have 2 draft resolutions they're considering, L16 and L52. And then finally, section 3 has the actual resolution that they are putting forth to the General Assembly for consideration. So here, there's actually 2, L16 and L52, and if we look here at what happened, they actually it says here that in November 9th, L16 was presented to the second committee, and the representative of Cuba brought it forth, and it was discussed. And then later, November 21st, at another second committee meeting, L52 was brought forth by Ghana, and then that was L52 was on the basis of informal consultations held on draft resolution L16. So I guess L16 was brought to the committee on November 9th. Probably there were some questions. Some countries maybe wanted to do some some changes. So there was some discussion for a couple weeks, and then finally Ghana brought forth L52. And in fact, here we can see that the committee did adopt draft resolution L52. And then at this meeting, we had representatives from the US and Switzerland. They made statements after the adoption. So it went ahead and passed, but US and Switzerland had to make a point afterwards. And we'll actually hear some of that later. And then, based on the fact that L52 was adopted, then draft resolution L16 was withdrawn by its sponsors, Cuba. So here's actually the second committee meeting on November 9th, where Cuba is bringing forth the resolution, and it's just interesting to listen to the representative here give the introduction to the resolution, and then just also provide just a few sentence summary about it. So let's listen to it.
On agenda item 16F, I have the honor to introduce G77 draft resolution entitled Promotion of International Cooperation to Combat Illicit Financial Flows and Strengthen Good Practices on Asset Returns to Foster Sustainable Development, as contained in document A/C2/70A/L16. The importance of this resolution cannot be overemphasized, as it speaks to the needs of countries who have suffered due to the illicit transfer of funds and the slow pace of recovery and return of such stolen assets to countries of origin. The concept of illicit financial flows is multidimensional and comprises of numerous components, including illegal and legal aspects. The complexity surrounding the concept requires constant deliberation to enable us to foster deeper understanding of the term, agreement on empirical methods for measuring, and ultimately designing policy responses into adequately address this phenomenon. This year, our text reiterated four fundamental truths, namely, that combating illicit financial flow is an essential development challenge, that illicit financial flows reduce the availability of valuable resources for financing for development, and that developing countries are particularly susceptible to the negative impacts of illicit financial flows. That enhanced international cooperation is a sine qua non to addressing IFS also. It's our hope that this resolution will continue to enjoy the support of our partners as we aim to produce a document that will dignify the lives of every human being and address the challenges of IFF. We are pleased to inform you that the delegation of Kenya and Angola are coordinating this resolution on behalf of the group.
So we heard the representative talk about the illicit financial flows, and so this is the crux of this resolution, how to combat illicit financial flows. And the problem is that it's very difficult to define that. In fact, we'll hear from the United States. That's one thing they struggle with, is that it's not well defined. There seems to be many different treaties and different ways that that the international community is already combating illicit financial flows, and so the United States is kind of saying, like, let's let them handle it. They've already worked on it. There's no need to start another avenue to create a whole framework. It's already been created, so let's just work off with what we have. But going back to the reason why the United Nations wants to have this to begin with, is that they have their big 2030 agenda for sustainable development, and one of the items inside there is combating illicit financial flows, and so this is kind of an attempt to work towards that. So in this resolution and in other documents, you could see there's a real struggle to define illicit financial flows. From what I've seen, there's like three main categories of financial flows that are deemed illicit, and those are one caused by tax evasion, another by corruption, and then the third is transnational organized crime. In fact, there's the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime that created this statistical definition of illicit financial flows as one of the things that they're tasked with regard to that 2030 agenda. And so they go ahead and at least they start the definition. They say that it has the following features. It's illicit in origin. Again, what does that mean? So they say that it originates from criminal activities or tax evasion. It's illicitly transferred, which violates currency controls, or illicitly used, financing terrorism. The flow can be legally generated, transferred, or used, but it must be illicit in at least one of these aspects. So the resolution has 43 operative paragraphs, and it tries to push forward this movement to combat illicit financial flows due to the harm that it creates, especially for developing countries where their resources are going elsewhere. And it's also trying to put in a framework so that if those resources are sent someplace else, that they can be returned. And so this is quite a complex field that the United Nations, the Second Committee, is trying to organize and to develop. And what we're going to see from the United States is that they're not against the resolution itself, but they just have some comments. Like I said before, the illicit financial flows, it doesn't have an internationally agreed upon definition. There's a framework already in place with the Convention Against Corruption, although that's just a small slice of the possible crimes where resources are transferred. They're also complaining that the resolution puts an overemphasis on asset return to the detriment of other parts, and that countries have to be domestically robust to fight this in other ways, not just focusing on the return of assets. And then the United States also makes a point of that they're the lead on the Conference of State Parties, where they're already working on anti-corruption and illicit financial flows with regards to that. And they say that it undermines their work. So it seems like there's lots of cooks in the kitchen here. And all right, so now let's listen to the U.S. and their comments in the Second Committee.
First of all, the United States has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We thank the co-facilitators for their shepherding of this resolution. The United States appreciated the opportunity to participate in these important discussions over the past weeks and is joining consensus on this resolution. The United States strongly supports the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and notes that the UN Office of Drugs and Crime plays a central role in supporting our efforts to promote transparency, strengthen the rule of law, and combat corruption. Nonetheless, the United States reiterates its concern that the term illicit financial flows lacks an agreed-upon international definition when applied to the proceeds of crime. We understand that calls for or commitments to preventing and combating illicit financial flows refers to member states implementing their existing obligations and commitments to prevent and combat corruption and money laundering, terrorist financing, and other forms of illicit finance through robust implementation of the Financial Action Task Force recommendations and best practices enshrined in the existing international architecture. Regarding illicit financial flows, reducing illicit financial flows must fundamentally begin with preventing and combating the acts of corruption that facilitate such flows. Countries must prioritize domestic efforts to counter corruption and money laundering in line with their international treaty obligations, particularly those enumerated in the UN Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, and the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. The United States remains concerned this resolution places too much focus on vague commitments to address the ill-defined concept of illicit financial flows, to the detriment of pressing countries to take the domestic actions necessary to combat the crimes and fulfill the commitments member states have an obligation to address. Further, the United States reiterates that the international framework for asset recovery is primarily outlined in the UNCAC. This important treaty prescribes the measures states parties must adopt and implement to successfully detect, restrain, and confiscate the proceeds of crime. Unfortunately, this resolution misinterprets several of these obligations. The United States therefore reiterates that nothing in this resolution changes or nullifies the existing asset recovery treaty obligations that the United States takes very seriously. In addition, the United States expresses its concern that the resolution places an overemphasis on asset return to the detriment of other integral parts of the asset recovery process. Countries are only successful in asset recovery when they have the sufficient political will and capacity to investigate and prosecute corruption crimes domestically. More attention must be devoted to ensuring that all countries are domestically able to pursue all stages of the asset recovery process, including asset identification, detection, prosecution, and confiscation more effectively. Finally, the UNCAC Conference of State Parties, COSP, serves as the UN's lead body promoting anti-corruption and related anti-crime policy and is the appropriate venue for relevant experts to consider issues addressing the recovery and return of the proceeds of these crimes. As the host of the 10th session of the COSP, the United States regrets that this resolution undermines the UNCAC COSP's role in leading the discussion on corruption and asset recovery at the global level. We reiterate long-standing concerns that language in this resolution undermines our ability to work together constructively through relevant technical and treaty bodies such as the COSP to address money laundering, corruption, and other related crimes.
Okay, now we'll hear Mr. Ivailo Gatev from Bulgaria, the rapporteur for the second committee report. He will now present it to the General Assembly.
Under sub-item 16F, entitled Promotion of International Cooperation to Combat Illicit Financial Flows and Strengthen Good Practices on Assets Returned to Foster Sustainable Development, the Second Committee recommends, in document A78, 459, at 6, paragraph 7, the adoption of one draft resolution.
Okay, and now we'll hear from His Excellency, the President of the General Assembly, Dennis Francis. He'll bring the item forth and call a vote, and then the General Assembly will vote on the matter.
The General Assembly will consider the report of the Committee on sub-item F of Agenda Item 16 entitled Promotion of International Cooperation to Combat Illicit Financial Flows and Strengthen Good Practices on Assets Return to Foster Sustainable Development, issued as document A/78/459, Addendum 6. The Assembly has before it a draft resolution recommended by the Committee in its report. We will now take a decision on the draft resolution. The Committee adopted the draft resolution without a vote. May I take it that the Assembly wishes to do likewise? It is so decided. May I take it that it is the wish of the General Assembly to conclude its consideration of sub-item F of Agenda Item 16? It is so decided.
So that's just an example of a resolution that starts at committee and then ends up being adopted by the General Assembly. And in this particular instance, it was a resolution on the promotion of international cooperation to combat illicit financial flows. And if you want to read more about it, I'll put in the links to all these documents.